Back to Inde-Car on the 4th of August. Now, the news today is littered with, well, people, basically, politicians of one stripe or another, and in particular, I want to talk about three of those. Now, two of the politicians in question are leaving politics, basically. One has already left, that's Mhairi Black, and we'll come back to her just shortly. And the other more recent SNP, MSP to leave politics is, of course, Kate Forbes, the finance secretary currently. Now, to look at Miss Forbes or Ms. Forbes or Mrs. Forbes, I'm not really sure what the honorific should be. And having listened to her explanation of why she doesn't want to stand again in next year's general election to Holyrood, she came out with classic, I want to spend more time with my family. Now, in her particular case, I suspect that there is an element of truth to this because, let's face it, she's a young mum. She has a 3-year-old daughter, whom she perhaps has not seen as much as she wanted to, since her constituency lies a good distance away from Holyrood where she works, and I dare say that it's made being a mum almost impossible. So it may well be true that just because of her family situation, she feels that she can't in all conscience, remain in politics and leave the upbringing of her daughter, presumably, to her partner. Now, I don't know Kate Forbes' personal circumstances, but I suspect that her departure is largely due to exactly what she said. She just wants to spend more time with a 3-year-old daughter, which is fair enough, and I wouldn't say that there's any other particular motivation there. From the look of it, it seems perfectly genuine. But this is part of a wider trend that's going on with SNP MSPs at the moment. Now, I mentioned earlier Mhairi Black. And Mhairi Black, although she has stepped away from politics completely, she has now decided to make her career in the stand-up comedy circuit, as far as I understand it. And actually, to be fair, that probably would suit Mhairi Black's talents perfectly. She seems the sort of person who has a quick wit and might well make an excellent stand-up comedian. However, the reason I mention Mhairi Black is that she is also mentioned by Pete Wishart MP. Now, all those of you who watch this programme know that I don't have an enormous opinion of Pete Wishart as a human being or as a politician, but what he said today, I think, is plainly ridiculous, and it was highlighted by a number of well-known bloggers online, including Wings Over Scotland and many others, who quoted him extensively today. And what Pete Wishart said was he was trying to compare Mhairi Black, the former MSP, to Robin Mcalpine, and his claim was that at least she was famous, whereas Robin Mcalpine was just a political strategist. Now, anyone who knows anything about politics will know that Robin Mcalpine is one of the most knowledgeable political analysts that there are. And he has done years and years of solid work into formulating the exact makeup of how a newly independent Scotland should function and what it should and shouldn't be doing. And he's done all of this without ever entering politics. Mhairi Black, on the other hand, has been, as far as I remember, an MP, if I remember correctly, Mhairi Black. But what could she achieve in Westminster? Not very much is the answer to that. She was there as a representative of her constituency, which she did, I'm sure, perfectly well, but she really couldn't move the dial of independence at all from that position. Robin Mcalpine, on the other hand, is entirely independent of political parties and is able to step outside of it and look at Scotland as it is and work out ways in which it can get itself to the situation where it becomes fully independent. And that, to me, is far more valuable than standing up and down in Westminster, making arguments and being laughed at, which is essentially what Scottish MPs are for. As we all know, when the Act of Union was signed, or the Treaty of Union was signed, I think it was Daniel Defoe basically described this as the Scots would, of course, be permitted to sit in Westminster in small numbers, but primarily there for the sake of form and to be laughed at. And that has continued to this day. So poor old Mhairi Black was really on a hiding to nothing when she was elected to Westminster. I don't blame her for leaving either. I think she's probably got a much better career and life ahead of her outside of politics. But as I say, it's part of a wider trend within parties at the moment. It's not just the SNP, but it's interesting that it's the younger members of the SNP who are departing, and mainly women. And that tells you a few things about the current makeup of the SNP. And that brings me to my third point. And my third point is really about Mr. Swinney. Now, some people online recently have characterised John Swinney as having what they describe as a Biden moment. In other words, he has stayed too long. He claims to be, or is described as, a safe pair of hands, when what we actually want is not a safe pair of hands at all. We want somebody much more combative and much more radical in his outlook, or her outlook, to lead the SNP forward. Now, it could be, I might be wrong in this, it could be that if the trend of younger members of the SNP, or younger MPs and MSPs, leaving politics, it's possibly not just because they want to spend more time with family or because they want a different career, but it's because they know they can't make any difference if they stay in British politics, because Scotland's politicians are not there to make a difference. They're there basically to be laughed at and for the sake of form, as I've already mentioned. So being a Scottish politician really doesn't hold any great appeal for many people, other than, of course, the massive salaries and benefits that you get from being either an MSP or an MP, but that's really all there is. And you'll notice that the people who stay behind, I'm thinking here of Mr. Swinney, Angus Robertson, maybe John Nicholson, one or two other well-known and long-term occupants of various seats with the SNP, are likely to stay, but largely because they don't feel the need to disappear off to bring up children or to pursue a different career where there might be some chance of success or something better than standing up and down in Westminster or standing up and down in Holyrood, making sounds and dealing with the minutiae of daily life in Scotland without actually affecting anything big whatsoever. So if this is true, if it's true that they're losing a lot of younger talent, then that's very disappointing, because it means that we're going to be stuck with the Bidens of Scottish politics, the ones who are too old, who really are not particularly strong characters, not particularly charismatic. In fact, in some cases, completely non-charismatic. I would think that Mr. Swinney might fall into that category. He has the same kind of charisma as a bank manager or an insurance salesman. He's not the kind of man to inspire confidence in an electorate to vote for independence. Now, it's also been remarked recently that the SNP has gone into decline, especially in the polls. Its current polling is extremely poor at the moment. It's somewhere down, I believe, around 30%. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the kind of level that independent support was at when Alex Salmond was successful in getting a full majority, an outright majority in Holyrood, something that has never been equalled since his time. And that's what independent support was when Mr. Salmond took charge of things. Independent support now is over 50%, and it has been over 50% for the better part of at least 2 years, possibly longer than that. And the polls that we're seeing, the poll results that we're seeing, are consistently above 50%. They have been for a long, long time. But you need to remember that the poll results that you see are polls commissioned from British companies by British-owned newspapers, which do have an agenda. And so the figures may not be as good as they might be in real life. They will be massaged. Now, many people question polls because one of the things that the British pollsters do is that they weight the results. Now, that means they apply to the results a reality which is no longer real, and it's the reality of 2014. It's the reality of the way people would have supported independence in 2014. And they assume that all of the old people, if you like, or older people who were alive in 2014 who would not vote for independence are still here, when in actual fact most of them have died long ago. So that weighting obviously makes those polls seem worse than they really are. The SNP has intimated a number of times, actually, in recent media statements, that it is looking for a sustained growth in independence support in the polls, not in any kind of election or in any kind of referendum, but in polls. And these are polls published by British newspapers. They haven't specified exactly how high it's supposed to get before they do something about it, but this is very reminiscent of the old "it must be above 60% line, which we used to hear a few years ago. But that's an arbitrary level. We could well be miles above that already and we wouldn't know about it. So I suppose what I'm saying today is the fact that younger, perhaps even more charismatic members of the SNP are leaving, particularly younger women, makes you a little bit suspicious that it's becoming a bit of an old man's club, and that the people who are basically going to cling to power and stand for election next year are the same old faces, the Bidens of the SNP, if you like, when actually what's needed is some new blood. Now, to be fair, Alba itself, the main, I guess, opposition party, as it would characterise itself to the SNP, is also led by a stalwart in Kenny McCaskill, who's, let's face it, of the same vintage as Mr. Salmond and holds many of the same views and is popular because of that. However, Alba hasn't managed yet to get a good amount of traction over the electorate. And they also haven't formulated, in my view at least, a credible plan for how to achieve independence other than making next year's general election a so-called plebiscite election, which is something which is never going to go down with the UK government, because no matter how well we do, and remember, the SNP is insisting an SNP majority is the only thing that will get us independence. The Alba party is insisting that a general majority for pro-independence parties is the mandate for independence. Neither party has outlined exactly how they will do this, and that is always the missing part of the jigsaw. The ISP and Inde for Inde, which is a group of smaller parties, are fighting these two parties in the lists and in some cases, I believe, also in the constituencies. So next year's general election in Holyrood looks like it's going to be, I think, going to be a little bit disappointing. Now, I don't know exactly what the result will be, but I am prepared to be underwhelmed by the result. If the SNP manages a majority at all, they will need help from somebody else, and at the moment from everybody else, including us, the rest of the independence movement, which is sad, because if they didn't do that and the entire movement go back together again the way it had been in 2014, then we could really accomplish something. But we have to wait at the moment until we get the official recognition from the United Nations C24 committee that Scotland is a non-self-governing territory of England. Because if we were even if we had a brilliant result next year and Alba said, yes, we're going to unilaterally declare independence, we would end up in a Kosovo situation, because, as Sarah Salih says, unless you have the acceptance of other countries, other UN members, you end up in a situation like Kosovo, where it announces its independence, but it's only recognised by a tiny handful of countries. And we also know that if Scotland did that, if we unilaterally declared independence without first getting that non-self-governing territory classification from the UN, we would probably be rejected for support by other countries, and it would mean we would be trapped in this limbo of having declared independence but basically not being able to separate ourselves from England, and everybody in the rest of the world wondering what the hell's going on, because there hasn't been any official recognition by the UN that Scotland was a non-self-governing territory in the first place. So a number of things need to happen in sequence. The result of the UN presentation, which has been made by Salbo and Liberation.Scot, is still to happen. But once it does happen, then the parties of independence can finally do something about gaining independence. And at that point, we might be able to see a way through this, and there might be a credible plan emerges in political minds. But I fear that as long as Swinney is in charge of the SNP, that may not happen. I think the SNP needs new leadership, it needs new dynamism, it needs new ideas, and it needs new faces. The same careworn, tired old bank manager type faces are not going to cut it, especially with younger voters who are more attracted to far more charismatic and much more radical orators than Mr. Swinney. So anyway, that's it today, really. It was just a case of looking at who's left the SNP, and it's been two young women, and one after the other. Kate Forbes is a bit of a surprise, but then thinking about her family situation, maybe we shouldn't be surprised. She's a young woman with a very young daughter, and I wouldn't blame her for wanting to spend more time at home rather than taking the pelters that she gets in the media. So that is understandable. Mhairi Black also, I think, is fed up with being in the news and being the subject of a lot of horrible abuse from all sides, so nobody can blame them for that. As for comparing Mhairi Black to Robin Mcalpine, I think Pete Wishart really needs to get a grip, because Mhairi Black and Robin Mcalpine are completely different types of people. Mhairi Black entered politics to try and do some good. Robin Mcalpine spends all of his time preparing Scotland for independence and coming up with the necessary planning and strategies to actually create a new country. That's something politicians never, ever do. Anyway, I shall leave you with those thoughts. In the meantime, keep the faith, and I'll see you next time. Also, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, and if you want to, subscribe to the channel for more details. And I'll see you next time on Inde-Car. Bye for now.